Hello and a very warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us at this very special webinar to launch the new WPP BAV Navigating Brand Disruption Playbook. My name is David Roth from WPP, and it's an absolute pleasure and a delight to have you with us for this broadcast. We're going to be exploring some of the key themes that have emerged from the playbook, and there are no better people to help us do that than some of the people who help contribute to the thinking and the development of this playbook. So it's absolutely my pleasure to introduce to you our cast of protagonists for the next 45 minutes. So it's great welcome to Jason Gargausku, who is the Chief Transformation Officer at VML, Jane Renandi, the Director of BAV for Asia and also our Consumer Psychology Unit, Carolina Silva, who is the General Strategy Director of David in Sao Paulo, Janet Levine, the Global Head of Innovation at Mindshare, Ken Shept, a journalist and best-selling author, and Ken helped us write the report, and Andrew Missingham, the Executive Director of Consumer Insights at AKQA. Well, a very warm welcome. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're not going to go through all the elements of the report because we'll give you a URL and you can download that yourself and have a look at all of the information and probably the most important element of it is the insights and what you need to do. But what we want to do is have a broad-ranging discussion on some of the elements that we uncovered, and also help you understand a little bit more about what disruption could mean to you and your clients, and what disruption could mean in terms of what's going to happen in the years ahead, and how you need to maybe adapt and change some of your thinking. So I think maybe let's start with a bit of level setting. What do you think, we'll start with Jason, are the key sort of driving factors that drive disruption in market categories and brands today?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. As cliche as it may sound, I think that we tend to lose track of the fact that the only constant is change. And I think, brands and their partners get caught up on optimizing to some current moment, as opposed to really being invested in the work of continuous reinvention. And, I think that certainly we've seen in recent years forces come forward around geopolitical change and deglobalization. Looking back over the past 15, 20 years or so, broadband reaching 50% penetration, and then about a decade later, smartphones reaching 50% penetration were real inflection points of technological change. And so I think brands wrestle with both these acute moments of change, but also the broader reality that change is inevitable and it will happen by them or to them.
Janet, what's sort of your perspective?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with Jason. You have to think about the starting point. A lot of people hear the word disruption and think that it has to be a small and scrappy challenger brand, that is really changing a category. But on the flip side, you also have to think about bigger brands that earn people's attention and keep people's attention. That is equally disruptive. At the end of the day, disruption equals outcome. And as different brands kind of work through the landscape, what is that outcome you're going after? Is it sales? Is it attention? Is it trying to break through algorithms? So I think level setting what disruption means for your brand first is really critical.
Now, Andrew, you're dealing with a lot of brands that are being disrupted at the moment. What would you say to how you would define the way disruption is impacting the clients that you worked in, the sectors that you're operating in, and therefore your view and attitude about what disruption really means?
Yeah, I think that Jason and Janet's points are correct, especially regarding, well, if you're a Vipassana meditator, you would know the word change as anicca, and this idea of anicca, change being constant, is absolutely true. But what I think we're feeling at the moment is we're feeling a confluence of a number of different types of disruption seeming to come at the same time. Political and kind of geopolitical disruption of systems that have gone back to a post-Second War settlement being upended, the rise of populism being one of those effects. And we've already had, reference in this conversation to people and systems increasingly getting kind of more localized, and more kind of tariffs going up and stuff like that. We've got that stuff plus the effect of technological revolutions. And actually, one of the things I think that's most interesting and most disruptive are the generations for whom this technology is now ordinary and commonplace. Therefore, the magical tricks that we once saw as magical tricks are no longer magical tricks. Once those things become ordinary and commonplace, that opens a few things. Firstly, the things that we used to do that cut through no longer happen. Similarly, businesses which were predicated on growth hacking and on new things that people didn't expect, people now expect. And so there's a whole load of confluences of disruption happening at the same time.
I mean, I think it's a very interesting point that you make, that there's certain of the things that maybe our generation saw as magic and quite amazing with technological changes over the course of maybe the last 15 years in particular, that this current generation just view as, well, I expect it anyway, and why wouldn't we be able to do that? And therefore, for brands to do things that are unexpected and to overperform is becoming a much more difficult thing to be able to do. Now, maybe let's start a little bit, talk a little bit about the BAV model that I suppose drove some of the way and the lens that people have looked at disruption through the report. The BAV model sort of measures differentiation and relevance and esteem and knowledge. But Jane, how does this framework help us identify vulnerable brands versus well-positioned disruptors?
Yes, David. So at BAV, we have studied brands for over 30 years, and over that breadth of data allows us to see that successful disruptors serve previously unmet needs by offering new and creative solutions, and that sets them apart from the rest of the category. Consumers recognize this by scoring them higher than the category on BAV's differentiation metrics. So we can very quickly, using BAV data, assess who are the disruptors and who are the vulnerable brands that are ripe for this to be disrupted. Vulnerable brands, typically they show as lacking differentiation in our data set. They may be highly relevant, very well regarded or esteemed, very well known, but they don't really have a unique or clear reason for being. So then they truly risk losing consumers the moment a more compelling alternative, a disruptor, appears.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, one of the key sort of findings that we found, and the data and the substantiation for that will be in the report, that between 1993 and 2003, 94% of leadership brands maintained their position, but between 2014 and 2024, only 50% did. So I'm quite interested, Janet, in your take on, what fundamental marketplace changes have taken place, making becoming a leader and maintaining a leader much more difficult to sustain.
Yeah, I mean, brands are having a hard time if they don't center themselves on knowing the role of the brand, their value exchange, right? There's a lot of, I wouldn't call it experimentation, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And so for brands, we want them to be differentiated, and there's plenty of times to do it. You know, you can look at which audiences you go after. You can go strategically have differentiation. You can look at using technology. But if you don't have that consistency of what your brand stands for, then people are going to sort of take in your information and just see the next thing, because the forces of that we all know, right? Saturation of the marketplace, algorithms dictating content. There's so many forces that give people more options to look at different things. And then you do have those challenger brands that are acting very differentiated. So if you're a major brand or a mid-sized brand and you don't have that behavior that allows you to act in a consistent way, it means that you're going to lose your position because you're going to stand for nothing. And people really need to either see you stand out or consistently know that you're going to behave in a certain way.
Now, Janet, what do you think has driven I suppose, the speed of change over the course of the last few years? Is it just sort of things that have gone on over time anyway, or is there a pace of change that is particularly virulent today?
I think it's the convergence of everything. That is what is setting the pace for today. So you see paid and earned coming together. You see creative and retail. You see social and everything. You see AI integrating into everything. It's the rapid pace of the way that media and technology and consumer behavior is happening. It just means that there's more choice. And sometimes it also means it's harder to find the signals, which is why if we go back to the points of finding things that are more enduring, that you know what you're standing for, that could be your starting point. And then you could start to look at all the things that are beginning to converge and say, how can I use it to a competitive advantage versus being lost in the system?
Now, Carolina, perhaps you can give us a perspective, maybe both globally, but in particular across Latin America, in terms of the pace of change, because things are changing, I think, probably faster in Latin America than they are certainly in Europe, and also, I suppose, the challenge of brands in Latin America remaining leadership brands under that constant threat of disruptors and change.
Sure. So I agree with Janet that there is this conversion happening also in Latin America and specifically Brazil, where I'm from. I do understand that the barriers have become so low to entrance in so many different categories. So this also helps us to see so many new brands and so many new offers to consumers. And not only that, but I feel like this power shift is also very important. So you see local brands very well positioned, and local brands really bothering the big brands. So I feel like this is a phenomenon that we do see here, as I feel we see globally, but in Latin America, this local flavor and understanding the particular needs of the culture that you're in really have disrupted so many categories, you know, from chocolate to beauty. We see very much a change in the dynamics of the categories. I feel like in terms of brands that have been able to endure those changes, the brands that do that are the brands that understand the need for this local approach and the need for understanding this shift from consumer, not only being the brands that tell the consumers what innovation is or what they should be looking at, but also listens to them and understands the trends around those categories.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about brands that are listening to their consumer, because, I mean, you would have thought that it's a fundamental core skill of a brand to understand its consumers. So what's happening? Are consumers changing at such a rapid rate that it's very difficult for brands both to catch that, understand that, and then to implement it fast enough?
For sure. I feel like, as we also already talked about here, I feel like consumers are way more demanding in terms of they have unveiled the curtains of marketing and branding. I think more there than any time in our lives, that they know how the mechanics of branding and advertising work now. So it's really a matter of respecting that understanding. And I feel like big brands maybe sometimes don't, or brands that get too comfortable and not really listening to the consumers, they tend to ignore that active part that people have right now with brands. I feel like brands that do understand them are brands that co-create. It's brands that give space to local voices, be that of local celebrities or local communities. So really having that shift between the brand telling consumers what they should do and look at and like, and really understand and giving them that space to collaborate with the brands.
Now, one of the summary points that came out of the report was that economic polarization and consumer power shifts sort of drive most of the disruption. So I'm intrigued to ask actually everybody, which of those factors do you think impacts the sectors that you're working on, the clients you're working at, most and most profoundly? Perhaps let's start with Jason.
All of the factors obviously contribute, but I would really hone in on the shift in of consumer power. I think that most organizations have not yet really digested the fact that they really need the patronage of a customer far more than a customer needs any offering from any company, because of course there's infinite competition, which means that all brands are fundamentally incredibly replaceable these days. And where I see organizations doing a bit better are the ones that are faster to shift investments towards customer experience rather than maintaining and nursing their addiction to attention.
Thanks, Jane.
Yes, I believe that the shifting needs of consumers and the shorter attention span of consumers, the constant inundation of messages being aimed at consumers, right, it's really difficult for brands to break through all the noise and really deliver what is needed right now. Because I think the consumers today really reward speed of delivery, especially what we see in Asia, right? Like the 2-day delivery of Amazon Prime in the US, that's too long for Asia. It's like instant same-day delivery within hours.
2 hours in Asia is a long time.
Right.
2 minutes is probably what we're heading towards.
Exactly. If it requires more than 2 clicks to make my transaction happen, is too many clicks, right? So there is this kind of constant just need for a brand to just kind of communicate what their offerings are very quickly and how to get it to the consumers very quickly. That's really, really key.
Andrew.
I'm going to challenge this idea of consumer power at the moment, and I'm not challenging the concept, but I'm looking at it from a different point of view. I believe that consumers are feeling increasingly disempowered at the moment, and therefore they are rebelling. I think that they're using their franchise in terms of the choices that they make, the things that they buy or don't buy, the places they go or don't go, as one way of exercising a bit of power where people are feeling endemically powerless. This again goes back to questions of societal norms, political systems that are being questioned like never before. And so actually the idea of your consumer status as a franchise of sorts, I think, is something that, in terms of the data and insights we look at AKQA, it's certainly something that we see more of. What brands can do about it is more, for our business is interesting. And that comes down to the fundamental question of what a brand is. All a brand is a promise. whether you keep that promise or not is, very often what's going to determine your brand strength of one sort or another. And again, in terms of, differentiation, in terms of relevance, in terms of esteem, in terms of all of the things that knowledge, all the things that we measure through BAV, those very often are tests of whether a promise is kept or broken.
I can't help but ask you this particular question. So what is it? Are there a lot more broken promises now, or are the promises becoming much more difficult to keep?
It's a really good question. I think it's more complex than that. I think that people are demanding the promises, as we heard earlier, to be. There's two things. There is in the face of broken promises or perceived broken promises in other areas, people have an increasing need for the brands to deliver the promises that they say they keep. That sits alongside the enhanced ability to see and hear and feel what brands are doing in terms of social media, in terms of our ability to not just consume but contribute to social media ourselves and be part of the conversation itself. And so I think what it requires for brands is that they are a lot more focused on what the promise is, and therefore, under promise, over deliver.
That's always a good motto, I think. Janet, what's your perspective?
I think often marketing has a surface level problem. And so it's novel to work in a subculture or like a micro community. But when you really take a step back, what we have to do as marketers and guardians of brands is we have to create for, by, and of community. And we need to move marketing into the many to many model. One to many is a TVC that goes out to a lot of people. Modern marketing is one to one or one to few. But I'd also argue how many brands have DCO or personalization. And so what we need to get to is something that unlocks high reach and high engagement, and that's working with many communities of many sizes. Then, like, to keep the promise is to be part of the community. It's you find the role of your brand and you create content, experiences, and messaging for all of those types of communities, big, medium, and small. And then you make a commitment to that community, right? Because you have a role to play. There's some type of value exchange. And I think when you can start to move into that model, it's a brand losing control a bit, but it does open up the opportunities for what everyone has been talking about, to get more local insights, to create programs of co-creation. You have to start to build your entire ecosystem. And I think that's the consumer force, right? They can do whatever they want. They can hop to any brand. They can be price sensitive. We need more ways to appeal to more people. So I think strategically, if we can start to make that shift, we can start to layer in the differentiation. We can find all of the levers to pull through that BAV data and start to design for the consumer versus designing for the marketer, who traditionally might just push something out. We need to earn people's attention.
Carolina, what's your perspective? It's a nice notion of sort of working much more for the consumer than working for the marketing department.
Yes, for sure. I feel like what really resonates with me, not only the power shift that we were talking about and working towards the consumer, is also having the sensibility of their vulnerabilities. So in Latin America, I think historically it's really hard not to say that economics is, very pressing. We do have a lot of the population that doesn't have that much buying power. So what we need to understand is how, as we were saying, like the promise that we have is not only to have affordable prices, it also is respecting this scenario that we live in Latin America, because we do have to earn their attention, but also be sensitive to their reality. understanding that, well, if they cannot afford, you know, 100-gram bar of chocolate, then let's make it 30 grams, let's make it 50. What we see in the market in the region is that people do not abandon their favorite categories. They tend to get creative. And so that's where the space for the you know, the more disruptive brands or the scrappy challengers or the locally relevant brands is that they really understand and they're sensitive to the context of people. So I feel like it's really a mix, but economics is important for us.
Thanks. Now, Ken, I know you don't work on clients, but I wondered, given your role in orchestrating and then finally writing the report together with the team, I wondered if you had some sort of perspective, having spoken to a lot of people on this, of the relative sort of proportions of importance of the economic, the polarization, and the consumer power shifts. All the same importance, or does one stand out to you much more than the other?
In this case, what I'm thinking, and perhaps because I'm sitting in the U.S., is some of the political implications. And what I'm thinking about specifically is, for example, in retail, because of the pressure of tariffs, Walmart has decided to announce that it may need to raise prices. But this is a company based on EDLP, everyday low price. And at the same time, Home Depot, which is a company in part based on wide range, has said it may need to cut back on SKUs. So I think, to go back to the point that Andrew made about a brand as a promise, and I think part of what's happening with this political pressure is that brands are re-examining their promise. So I think it's one thing to sort of nibble at the edge to kind of accommodate the political winds. I think the dangerous point is that brands are starting to dig deeper, and I think that becomes problematic.
Thanks very much. Now, all of you have mentioned to an extent the elements of economic disruption at the moment, and obviously that definitely can't be ignored. In fact, we included in the report, you'll see a survey in America that we did specifically for this report, which we did in collaboration with, it's a BAV survey in collaboration with the Bounce platform. And one of the findings we got from that survey was that 58% of Americans reported increased costs of living and 39% less likely to buy brand names as a result of this. Janet, I wonder how you, in a sense, when you're media planning, when you're working out the relationship between the planning and the buying of that, how do you balance the communications of sort of price sensitivity with brand equity and also with performance marketing?
I mean, a lot of it, I agree with what Caroline was saying, is there is a reality to what is going on today. Like, a lot of us work in major cities and we have to put ourselves in the shoes of, just people across America who are in different situations. I think perhaps a different way to answer it is, if the pricing is happening and people's economic state is what it is, what else can a brand deliver, right? In the right tone. Is there a secondary usage of the product, a hack that's surprising that can help stretch it a bit more? Is there some type of experience that we can create and go into maybe regions of America that don't typically get those experiences? How can we add a little bit of happiness or joy? But if they're struggling, it can't all just be sunshine and like the entertainment and Hollywood of things. Like, there's real need states that are happening. So I think it's less about the buying and more about how your brand wants to show up. And really, in these times, it's how do you help communities? How will you roll up your sleeves? And that can be in real life or digital. But it's a much different exercise. than just, making sure the ad is in front of the right people. I think you have to have the right behaviors and create the right value exchange for people.
Now, in case any of you are thinking, well, maybe it's just us marketeers who are think that there's a lot of disruption around. We actually asked consumers in the States as part of that study what they've thought, and 71% of US consumers believe that they were in a period of disruption, and 68% also believe that the world itself was in a big period of disruption as well. Let's move our attention now to talk a little bit about category vulnerability. Now, one of the deep dives that was done with the BAV data was to have a look at various different categories and how those categories have changed in terms of the way in which consumers see the brands within them as being differentiated. And there's some real standouts. Bottled water, 51% drop in differentiation from 2012 to 2022, 34% for department stores and mass merchandisings, and kitchenwares at -20 as well. Jason, I'm intrigued to get your perspective on which categories do you see sort of similar differentiation changes in, looking forward over the next sort of 5 years. Why do you think that might happen, and what could be done to prevent it?
It's a wonderful question. I think we are in real time right now watching the collapse of differentiation around various forms of social media, right? I think one of the explanations that brings that forward is there does seem to be, let's say, a half-life for a particular idea, and we may be entering into a new space where the time of social media has passed. It's an idea whose time has passed. Broadly beyond that, when you look at the broad consumer goods space, almost any category that can be purchased in a grocery or supermarket, I think they're all vulnerable to a collapse in differentiation. And key contributors to that are economic pressures that extend to the retailers. And what we've seen during the course of our careers is that what were once generic brands became house brands, became private label brands that now ought to be regarded as wholly owned consumer brands. And what you can see with Kirkland, which is a brand owned by Costco here in the States, it's now larger than Nike, and it sells everything from toothpaste to trail mix to beer. Right. And what you can observe with Trader Joe's and Aldi is you can build a remarkably successful high margin business only on your own private label consumer brands. Right. And I think that the Targets, the Costcos, the Walmarts of the world are getting better and better and better at creating their own wholly owned brands. And they have both a margin advantage because they don't have to pay slotting fees, and they have an economic incentive to disrupt differentiation in the category to drive more relevance and sales to their options. Cheese, yogurt, toothpaste, deodorant, pick a category. I see a lot of vulnerability.
Are we stuck with vulnerability, or what can be done to prevent it?
I think what I'm seeing in the data is as certain categories sort of experience this collapse, there tends to be one or two historic legacy standout, historical leadership brands that tend to endure, right? I think that Tide will probably be the winner in the laundry detergent category. I think that Coca-Cola continues to gain market share even as per capita consumption of carbonated sugar water goes down, right? And so I think those brands that really double down on differentiation and invest in it rather than being overly concerned with awareness and fame, those tend to be the ones that protect and preserve their differentiation and show up as winners over time.
So that's your insurance policy.
That's your insurance policy.
From your perspective.
Yes, so I feel like I agree with the social media perspective on, everyone is so much invested in saying the same things and attracting the same people. I see not only that, but the financial services category also seems like a very prone to being in less differentiation, just because the offering is so similar. And they change colors, they change jingles, but at the end of the day, there are few brands on the financial services that are really catering to, as we said, the specific needs of consumers or the vulnerability or understanding where they're at now. So I feel like before, financial services was really a category that would pull our references and communication, but it is really something that we should watch out. Vehicles as well. In Latin America, I feel like very well-known brands and very large brands that before were a synonym of a grand ascent, or something that you could display and be someone that is a proud owner of a Chevrolet, is now something that I feel is very much condensed into one single promise. And if we don't really if those brands don't understand their real role in people's lives, I feel like that is where they can be more vulnerable.
Now, Janet, very quickly, what role does purpose play in differentiation strategy?
Oh, it cut out just a little bit. Can you repeat yourself?
Of course, and I probably dealing with a huge subject and very badly ask you to do it very quickly, which is, what role does purpose play in differentiation and creating a differentiated brand today?
Yeah, I mean, purpose is also one of those words of what does it mean, right? Like, we have gone through the purpose in terms of sustainability and what good you will do for community, or does it get wrapped into just what does your brand stand for and against? And that's what we mean by, how does the brand want to operate in the world? I think certain categories and certain brands, some of the greatest brands that have purpose have done it over a lot of time, and they've been able to take a look at what the marketplace is and consumer behavior and maybe modernize it a bit more, right? So there's still inherently purpose built into the brand, but I think you can't stay exactly the same every single day. You have to adjust and adapt to what's happening. So purpose will play a role. I think brands need to look kind of hard of what does it mean, and then really try to act like that throughout all of their touch points, not just like a flash in a pan, right? Like not just at one tentpole event or one piece of the operation. How can it be more pervasive?
Now, we talked quite a lot about the importance of being differentiated, but where the rubber really doesn't meet the roads is in financial performance as well. Now, again, this analysis is in the paper. You'll be able to look at how it's calculated and the results yourselves. But to give you a top line, we've looked at the top 50 differentiated brands, looking at their share price performance versus the average on NASDAQ. And the top 50 differentiated brands delivered over 1,000% returns versus the NASDAQ's 310 over the period that we looked at it. So I suppose my question for you, Andrew, is how do you communicate differentiation's financial value to the C-suite? Because clearly not only is there a brand benefit in it, there is definitely a share price enhancing shareholder value perspective as well, which I think is getting very lost.
It's a great question, and it actually alludes to something that a lot of marketeers have a challenge with when communicating to C-suites about the value of questions like differentiation. And that is, it's a slow burn, one. And secondly, because it's a slow burn, it's only when the house is on fire that you realize you need to put it out. In other words, you need to find greater differentiation. There are many things that signal or that are allowed by differentiation that have a financial effect. You know, very often your differentiation allows you to charge a premium price compared to competitors. It's a higher customer retention and longer lifetime value for customers. Basically, it leads to differentiation, leads to higher loyalty. That's also in terms of just recall and awareness. Unaided, you know, awareness of brands is very often facilitated by differentiation, and that you've got to realize happens for everybody, not just consumers, but actually buyers in store who are trying to make, you know, their shelves look good and are going to give prominence to stuff which is highly differentiated, therefore people are aware of. Similarly, you've got to start to see there's something we haven't talked about before, which is brands as employer brands, the brands that attract the smartest, best people, that can lower recruitment costs and can attract and retain the best talent, are often differentiated as well.
Now, Jason, you spend a lot of time with clients and brands and businesses in transformative moments in their organization's destiny. How easy is it to talk about the financial value to some of this investments rather than just the brand value?
It's honestly where I find the most fun, right? So, you know, when you think about brand equity, you can talk about it as a form of psychological marketplace capital. And I think that taking a lot of what we understand as marketers and translating it into the language and concepts of economics and finance is what's really most effective at helping people make responsible financial decisions, right? And what we see is that differentiation really is the most reliable indicator of sustainable competitive advantage, right? In addition to driving incremental improvement of all of your current operating metrics, including pricing power, price elasticity, sales velocity, sales volume, efficient return on media spend. It is the one thing where you can control your own destiny independent of the actions of others. Awareness, engagement, and fame, you can simply buy that. Relevance is often as much reflective of the category as it is of a specific player in that category. Differentiation is what gives you IP. It gives you an increase in stock price over time. It improves your capital efficiency. It decreases your cost of capital. And it has a very observable contribution to the valuation multiple that drives the total enterprise value of a business. And so by framing the power, the value, and the benefits of differentiation specifically and brand strength broadly through the language of economics and finance, I find that business decision makers pay attention.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for that. You are listening to our broadcast looking at the navigation of brands in a disruptive place with me, David Roth, with Jason, Jane, Carolina, Janet, Ken, and Andrew. Well, let's move on from looking at elements of disruption in terms of some of the metrics that we've seen, but also let's have a look at it in terms of some of the brands that are disrupting and brands that have been disrupted. So Ken and Janet, let's take a look at two brands that we have in our report: BYD, which is an electric car brand, and also Tesla, both competing in the same sort of space. Maybe Ken, first of all, what can we learn from this?
Well, I think there are actually two stories, and I think the challenge here is to keep track of both stories. So the first story is this competition between BYD and Tesla. What's interesting there is, last year, Tesla sold about 1.8 million EVs worldwide. Not bad. The problem was that was for the first year, its year-on-year sales were slightly off. Also, BYD sold more EVs. Underneath that, still both of those companies in China in BAV terms are in the leadership quadrant. But the difference is that BYD, which is also a battery maker, moved into the leadership quadrant virtually overnight from being a fatigued brand. So the other story really is the story about China's transformation from the factory of the world to a maker and marketer of branded products. And I think the takeaway for brands is to watch China, because it's not only making this transformation, but it's making it at lightning speed. And it's not going to change. So the question is to watch it and what can be learned, not from just from the Tesla BYD example, from generally this Chinese transformation.
Janet, your perspective really, I mean, it's interesting, that case history to me, in terms of, you know, it is possible to do, and there are other examples of it, of being a fatigue brand and being resurrected.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of, that model works across a lot of different categories. You know, what's old is new. I think it's a lot of the marketing and the packaging. And how do you find the people who, if it's a fatigue brand, who are those super fans or the advocates that are really championing it? And then how does it create that tipping point into mass culture? I would say two other things very quickly. I mean, could not agree more on you know, China leading the way for innovation. I mean, what's happening on the interior of the car, what's happening with the mechanics, right? That's just a lot of inspiration for the rest of the world. But I also, like, when I think of Tesla, I have to think of Elon, right? And like what happens there with his persona, and, you know, not to get into anything political, but, you know, he has a lot of presence, and he is infiltrating a lot of facets that are even beyond auto, right? But that creates a whole swirl of attention and other ways for him to, right, channel people into his corporation. So in any case, it's never just one thing. There are many factors, I think, that help start to shift things. And right, like maybe Elon's reputation, it would be interesting to look at him as a brand in BAV. You know what I mean? Like what happens in leadership position to fatigue, and sort of tracking that trajectory. And then how does it ripple out into the businesses as well?
Well, you can do that. So please, all of you, feel free to go to the font and have a look at some of those personalities who are also brands that we have included within the overall brandscape of BAV. Let's take a little look at a couple of brands that have mastered the art and science of maintaining leadership over a long period of time. Two come to mind, Oreo and Lego. Jason, have they managed to do it?
You know, I think both of those brands have really done a remarkable job of understanding and staying true to the reason that they exist in the world, right? And both of those a little bit connected to childhood, right? So with Oreo, there's obviously a notion of childhood and treats and cookie and a connection to milk, but they've never tried to become a more serious kind of cookie, right? It's playful. And they've really been able to emerge despite an erosion of their category. Over the past 20 years, they've not just maintained, they've actually improved their strength. Now, Lego, in a parallel way, deeply understands its reason for existence. It deeply understands how and why it improves and enhances the human experience. And that's through play. That's through an analog form of creativity. And they've done a wonderful job of recognizing that play and making and creativity while childlike is not limited to childhood. And so expanding Legos into a medium for serious artists, into a medium for collectors with, brand deals like around the Star Wars universe,
Yeah,
right? Like, I think that's
some of
really the
those
secret that they've
collectors,
done.
some of those collectors' Lego kits would consume all of your children's pocket money for now to infinity. I mean, they are purely
Absolutely.
aimed at the adult market by a long way. I have to declare an interest here because my son works for Lego. So I'm interested, Carolina, in does that transfer to LATAM, those sort of positionings, the longevity of it, both in terms of Lego and also Oreo? Was that very much an American-European perspective?
So for Oreo, for sure, we have a very strong brand. It is a brand that also plays into this playfulness territory here in Latin America. It doesn't have as much nostalgia, which I feel is very something linked to the time that brand has been in the market. But Lego, for instance, it really resonates with this kind of kidult movement, right? You are appealing not only for the child that is right now, but also from the child within. So I feel like those are where those brands stand here in Latin America.
Well,
One other example.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry.
No, please carry on.
One other example that I could give that is a little more local from leadership is O Boticário, which is a beauty brand. And beauty is a very disputed space, but as Jason was saying, it has not only been a synonym of beauty, but also of presence. So they have expanded that notion to keep the leadership and do it consistently.
I think there's also a great example, isn't there, in America, in particular in Brazil, of a chocolate brand, and I must say I always forget the name, so that's not great for me in terms of branding. But it comes out of the founders of also a health and beauty brand. They're also redefining what the chocolate market is all about.
Yes, for sure. I think you're referring to Dango.
I am indeed.
Yes. So this is a chocolate brand that is disrupting the category for sure, but presenting a different proposition for the local market. But again, not as massive as some of the other chocolate brands, but very much doing their job and expanding the repertoire of Brazilians and chocolate.
Well, as we bring this webinar to a close, a couple of quick areas to look at, I think. The first is from an organizational perspective. So how do you empower teams to think like challengers within a large organization structure? Janet?
Yeah, a lot of the smaller, scrappier challenger brands that you would say are disruptors, when given the next dollar, they're going to act like a mega corporation that has a lot of money. So I think you have to really start to understand.
We all revert back to type, do we?
Right. So we all have the power to have these behaviors, right? We shouldn't just be like, we can be inspired by the marketplace and the scrappy players, but I think it truly is about having differentiated behavior. It's about being risk tolerant. It's about finding enriching insights. It's about taking traditional media and using it in a non-traditional way. I mean, the list can go on, right? But I think that's the very first thing is it's all within our power. We just need to get the bravery and perhaps a bit of the operational power to enable it to happen. And then I think if you can connect it back to the results, just like Andrew and Jason were talking about, how it will drive your business, right? Then it should help encourage that behavior from the onset.
And Andrew, what can very large corporations learn? Large corporations, have comparatively infinite resource. What can they learn from category disruptors?
Oh, it's interesting because one of the things that is heartening for larger brands, you're not a disruptor forever. I mean, if you look at Tesla moving from being a disruptor to being an incumbent and then being challenged itself, we've talked about that. I think that what large corporations can learn is, where possible, stay agile, empower and delegate as opposed to abdicate as low as you can and as close to the consumers as you are. The amount of layers that you have between you and the consumer in larger corporations gets greater. So that's continue to be a storyteller, to continue to be a student, continue to really listen and learn and try and increase the speed by which you are able to react to the age of disruption we find ourselves in.
Now, cultural influence is having a significant importance, and from the BAV Best Countries study, we've seen that South Korea has jumped from number 27 in terms of cultural influence across the world to number 7 in just 8 years. So, Jane, how do you monitor and leverage the emerging cultural influences that has a great impact in brand differentiation?
Sure. So to monitor emerging cultural influence, we need to really pay attention to cultural signals and spot them early. One way to do it is through tracking global social media engagement metrics, for example, or we can also tap into insights from studies like our own WPP BAV Best Countries study. Now, to successfully leverage the emerging cultural influence, I think brands must be willing to go beyond just surface level engagement. Brands need to invest in really learning and understanding what drives the culture and authentically align with it without losing their core identity and values, which sometimes is really difficult when, especially coming from like a different culture, trying to leverage a culture that's not your own. But brands have successfully done so. An example is Nike's partnership with a South Korean streetwear brand called Peace Minus One. Peace Minus One was founded by a K-pop and fashion icon that goes by the name of G-Dragon. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him, but together Nike and G-Dragon launched limited edition sneakers, blending Nike's strong heritage with South Korean cultural aesthetics, never seen before. And this collaboration was very well executed. The sneakers sold out very quickly. Nike was able to stay true to its kind of identity and brand values of innovation, creativity, self-expression, while successfully leveraging South Korea's rising cultural influence. And ultimately, it boosts Nike's global relevance.
Now, we haven't really spoken about AI's impact, and it's clearly not a good marketing discussion if we don't mention AI at all. So maybe just one quick question on that for maybe Jason and Andrew, which is we've seen in our study that ChatGPT's usage, clearly has absolutely surged, clearly around the world, but specifically with the under 35s. How is AI search changing your approach to thinking about brand discoverability, about agents working on your behalf? Are we going to find that agents work much more on your behalf than search works on Google's behalf? Jason?
Yeah, I think that we, as an industry, we really need to recognize and equip ourselves and our clients for a kind of new era of usability, because everyone's digital footprint has been designed around maximal usability for an individual human, essentially sorting through file folders. And in an AI-driven agentic world, we need to reconsider, what does usability mean for an AI agent, right? And that actually changes how you write copy. It increases the necessity of making sure that processes like checkout work really well and really reliably so that the agent doesn't run into broken tasks or broken processes, right? So it really is a kind of fundamental redesign of digital presence and digital offerings around the needs of agents, right? And what that means in terms of ease and effectiveness, because that's then what's going to allow a brand to get through the gateway in order to be discovered by an actual human being.
Now, Andrew, you AKQA live, breathe this world day in, day out, hour in, hour out. What's your perspective, quickly?
Yes.
It's an interesting one, and actually I'm going to take it as a link to the thing that we've discussed a lot today, and that's differentiation. I think the watch out for me with AI is when it erodes differentiation, when you end up with a sea of mediocrity, because you're basically looking at the same pool of data, which is increasingly being populated by things which have lent from that same population of data. You're ending up in a place where you've got the danger of what's been coined Habsburg AI, where AI eats itself. I think that we can see in social media, and particularly in I'm going to name it LinkedIn, a situation where feeds are increasingly being populated by inauthentic, undifferentiated content, which has been very often AI generated. And what's that's doing is it's eroding the differentiation of the content, and therefore it's eroding the value of the brand. I think we need to be careful and mindful when we, as brands and marketeers, use AI, that we're making sure we are bearing in mind the need for differentiation that this whole conversation has been predicated on.
Well, I think you make a really important point. In fact, over the weekend, I for a bit of fun, created a little bot that automated the process of taking a YouTube video, transcribing it, and then writing a blog post on it. The ease that you can create content now is astonishing. But to your point, if all it leads to is complete mediocrity and maybe absolute rubbish, it sort of denigrates the task that it was enabled to do, and also the platforms that then contain all that content. So I think your advice is well taken. Now, please do download the report. The URL will come at the bottom of your screen in a few minutes. We've just scratched the surface. We could carry on for a long time, but I'm afraid the grim reaper of time has almost paid us his final visit for this session. But please do download the paper, and a great thanks to everybody. And you'll see a list at the end of all the WPP companies and individuals who participated in creating and being very generous with their insight. And a great thanks for Ken and Jane for compiling it. But I'm going to ask you all one final quick round question, which is looking ahead. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to a brand and brand leaders trying to stay relevant in this disruption landscape? Let's start with you, Carolina.
Sure. I think disruption is uncomfortable because it invites more questions than answers. And that's really, not how we operate in marketing and branding. We also seek for the answers and for the data. I feel that what disruption invites us to do is just ask more questions and be more curious.
Thank you very much. Janet?
I would say amp up risk tolerance. I think disruption allows you to be supremely creative and really bold. I think it can help, as I mentioned, in need states and real things as much as it can in entertainment and culture, as in like pop culture. So I think, you have to try. It's really easy to be the observer and say, wow, this other brand did it. It was amazing. Be the self-starter and amp up that risk tolerance.
Wise advice. Jason?
Yeah, I would really, really beware the optimization trap, because the reality is that responsiveness, resilience, agility, qualities that every business will say that they need, those qualities look precisely like waste right up until the moment that you need them. And so I would say to every business, unless you are intentionally investing real capital in your capacity for continuous reinvention, you are unintentionally investing in your own future vulnerability.
Ken.
I would echo the model that got the British through World War II, which is how we open the report: keep calm and carry on, except pick up the pace.
Jane.
I would say invest in emotional intimacy with your consumers, so that any dissatisfaction that they may start to feel about the category, a need that is being unmet, you would be the first to hear about it, and then you can start thinking about what you can do to meet those needs before somebody else does.
Finally, Andrew.
Yeah, it echoes a bit of what Jason was talking about, but for me, the tendency in times of disruption is to nail everything down as hard as you can. I actually think we need the opposite of that. We need wheels. We need everybody to ask themselves the question, how can we make this as changeable, as agile, and as portable as possible, and have that almost as an operating principle?
Well, all wise and sage advice. It's been absolutely fantastic session. It's always good to have a group of WPP senior leaders who are highly knowledgeable and at the top of their game, speaking and exchanging views. It really does help, I think, everybody put a little bit of context behind the BAV Navigating Brand Disruption paper. It's available now. The URL is on your screen, but for now I want to thank Jason, Jane, Carolina, Janet, Ken and Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.